Welcome to Equilibrium Echoes, the podcast where we delve into the transformative power of your inner world on your relationships. I'm your host, Alyssa Decker. Join me as we unlock the secrets of emotional equilibrium and dig deep into the tools and insights needed to foster healthier, more fulfilling relationships in ways that feel safe and authentic. Hey there, friends. Alyssa here. Today you're going to hear something a little bit different on the podcast this week. This episode was taken from my Speak Your Truth challenge. This was a 5-day experience that I originally hosted live inside my Facebook group. So you'll hear me mention the group or lives or interacting with other participants during the recording because that's how this content was originally delivered. But don't worry. Everything I taught applies to you right here, right now. This is a series of 5 episodes designed to help you stop shrinking yourself, start speaking up, and navigate your high conflict or challenging relationships with confidence and clarity. If, as you're listening, this content resonates with you and you're ready to go deeper, I want you to know that this is exactly the kind of work we do inside my coaching program, Conflict to Connection. I'll tell you more about that at the end of this episode, but for now, grab a journal and a cup of coffee and let's dive in. Today we're talking about understanding high conflict dynamics. Namely, why are these relationships, these people we have in our lives, why is it so dang hard? Why is it so exhausting? And in fact, my first point is, why do high conflict relationships feel like a trap? Have you ever felt like that, where you're in a relationship and it just sort of feels like the whole thing is a trap? Like no matter what you do, there's no right move. Drop trap in the comments if you've ever felt like that. Hi, Patricia. Hi, Linda. Hi, Mary. Yeah, Mary, just catch up anytime. You can go back to the links in your email to find the homework or in the video description. Today's is not there yet, but I will put it there when I'm done. Mary says trap. Linda, trap. Yes. It sort of feels like you can't win, right? Like there's nothing you can do to actually get it right or to make the other person happy. And that is not in your head. You are not making that up. So today we're going to talk about what's going on behind that and how we avoid the traps. So we're going to dig into 4 of the most common traps that happen in these relationships, these tricky dynamics, and then how you can avoid all of those traps. Oh, Nora says, I'm so articulate and easy to hear. You know what? Here's the deal. This is a little sidetrack, but thank you so much for saying that, first of all. Second of all, when I was growing up, I always thought I wanted to be a teacher, except that I couldn't picture myself stuck in a classroom with kids all day long. And so I went down a completely different path. I went into branding and design, which is like far left field from teaching, right? And it's really interesting and really fascinating to me to look back at my life and see how these paths have kind of brought me to where I am now. And I feel like some of the teaching skills and gifts that I have are now being used in an entirely different application. So it's pretty cool. All right. So trap. Yes, we all agree these high conflict relationships feel like a trap. So why is that? All right, let's get into it. You ready? Got your pens and papers, your pencils? This is going to be good. All right, so why do they feel like a trap? Let's talk about it. So the first thing is the emotional reactivity loop. Okay, that's a big term, and I'm going to break it down for you. So in high conflict relationships, here's what you already know. And by the way, when I say high conflict, okay, what I mean is the relationships that drain you, the relationships where it feels like everything is hard. Not every high conflict relationship, as I'm defining it, means that you're yelling at each other, okay? It just means that it is more prone to conflict. It is more prone to explosion. It is more prone to pain. painful experiences than your average relationship. Okay. So in a high conflict relationship, conversations are not about the words. And most popular relationship advice is focused on the words, right? Say the right thing at the right time. Make sure that when you say it, you phrase it in a way the other person can hear. Make sure you use I statements instead of you statements, right? All good advice in a healthy relationship, but we all have, because we're all here in this group, I can say with certainty, we all have that one person, or maybe more than one person, where we're like, yeah, tried that, didn't work, right? Drop one in the comments if you're like, yeah, that didn't work. All of that common, in all the books, relationship advice was full of crap when it came to my relationship. This, at least this one, right? Okay, so here's why. Because they're not about the words. They are about the emotional responses and power struggles. Yeah, seeing a lot of ones. Okay, so when you're having a relationship with a person like this, where this is high conflict relationship, there's a lot of butting heads, all this stuff. It's not about words. It is about emotional responses and power struggles. It's about manipulation. It's about that, like, they always have a hidden agenda, and it might actually be so hidden they don't know about it. Okay? My ex-husband thinks he's a great communicator. He will tell you that to your face. He does on a regular basis. What he doesn't understand, what he has no concept of, is that the way that he manipulates, or the way that he converses, is designed to manipulate and get the result that he wants, rather than just being clear and effective communication. So we get in these conversations. They're about emotional responses and power struggles. And when we get in this conversation, logic doesn't work. This is why the popular relationship advice does not work. Instead, because it's about emotion, this happens. We get triggered, activated, our emotional, we have this fight, flight, fawn, or freeze response. That's a tongue twister. Try saying that 3 times fast. And when that happens, we actually get a little bit disconnected, depending on the level of emotional reactiveness you have, or the level of fight or flight or fawn or freeze response that you have. You get disconnected from the part of your brain that formulates the well thought out, calm, logical responses. So it's not just that you feel like you can't come up with the right words. It's that you actually probably can't come up with the right words. Or if the other person is in this state of emotional dysregulation and you're trying to communicate calmly and with logic, they can't hear it. They can't process it, because we get disconnected from that part of our brain that formulates those responses. So this is why these things escalate, because the more reactive you become, the more reactive they become, the more reactive you become. And here's what happens. Most of the women I talk to, they're kind of on the receiving end. Most of you are on the receiving end of these kind of tactics. And so the more activated, the more dysregulated you become, the more control the other person tends to have in the conversation. Because very often they aren't getting as dysregulated as you are, because they're operating in, or they may be just as dysregulated, but they're more comfortable operating out of that state. They stay more in control. You start to lose control, and all of a sudden, who's dominating conversation? They are, right? And so as we go through these cycles, this happens, it escalates. Suddenly you're defending yourself. Suddenly you are freezing. Suddenly you are having some reaction that you never consciously chose, or you never really wanted to have. And you walk away from the conversation feeling like, ugh, ick, right? And they walk away from the conversation very often feeling like, I got what I wanted, right? Or at least they feel they were validated because maybe they feel like they proved their point, that they were right, or they feel like they asserted their authority and you capitulated, like whatever that looks like. Typically that other person's walking away feeling like they won something, and you're walking away feeling like you fell into the trap, right? It doesn't feel very good. Okay, so let's get really specific now. What are these four communication traps that we fall into? All right. And then we're going to talk about how to escape them, how to stay out of them, so we're not walking along and falling into the pit every time we have a conversation with this person. So trap number 1 is defensiveness. Okay? And this works both ways, both sides of the conversation. So you are having a conversation and somebody says something, usually the other person will say something, and all of a sudden you feel super defensive. And then you start explaining yourself, you start over explaining yourself, you start stumbling through your words, you start panicking, you start feeling like you want to run away in the closet and hide, right? Because you're feeling on the defensive. And when we're defensive and we're over explaining, we're almost never communicating very well. We're not communicating clearly. Drop 1 in the comments if you have fallen into this trap. On the other side of it, no, that wasn't what I wanted to say. At the same time, what's also happening is the more you defend, the more they attack. Because you are giving them more ammunition, right? They can twist your words. They can find new accusations. Well, now that you mention it, yes, that too, right? They can pull things out of your over explanation and use them to further attack you. And that's one of the reasons that this defensiveness is such a trap. 1. Yes, Wendy says she fell off the cliff on this one. Well, we've all been there, Wendy. It's okay. We're gonna work on that. Okay, so we'll talk in a minute about, that's trap number 1, defensiveness. We're gonna talk in a minute about how to stay out of that trap. Trap number 2, blame shifting. Blame shifting. But you're the one causing the problem. So you're having a conversation, all of a sudden you say something to try to defend yourself, to try to speak up for yourself, and they're like, I'm not the problem, you're the problem, right? Or this isn't my fault, this is your fault. Hang on 1 second. I'm closing a few browser tabs because I'm getting a warning that it will improve my connection and my video speed if I close some things. I don't want it to be laggy for y'all. Okay. So you bring up a concern, right? We're on blame shifting. Sorry for that little side note. Blame shifting. So you bring something up, right? Maybe you're trying to follow that really popular advice. Wait till things are calm. Bring it up in a calm tone. Use I statements, not you statements, right? And all of a sudden, you're the problem. And you're like, whoa, wait, what happened? We were talking about you and your behavior. And how am I suddenly the problem, right? You can't, and it's like, how did we even get here, right? Drop 2 in the comments if you've been there. Okay, so you might hear things like, where you might, this is really interesting because the reason I stopped there is because I realized this example that I wrote in my notes 2 weeks ago is something I've heard in this group. So here's an example. Well, if you bring it up and you say to someone, you hurt my feelings when you canceled last minute, they might say something like, oh, please, you cancel all the time. And if you were so sensitive, this wouldn't be an issue. Look at all those 2s. Okay, see how they flipped the script? Like you were bringing up something that you wanted to talk about, a concern that you had, and suddenly they've flipped the script, they've blame shifted. And then you might think, wait, do I cancel all the time? Am I overreacting? Right? And you're questioning yourself instead of holding your boundary. So this conversation, this trap works for them because what they've done is they've flipped the focus from their actions to something that you've done wrong or potentially done wrong, or that they have made up that maybe you did wrong. Okay. Because sometimes there's not even a real thing there. And it leaves you doubting yourself and feeling like you suddenly have to prove you're not the bad guy. Right? And you walk away from the conversation going like, that did not go the way I was hoping it would go. Okay, so that's trap number 2, blame shifting. Trap number 3, the guilt hook. If you loved me, you wouldn't do this to me. This is where they use guilt, obligation, or even your own empathy against you. So suddenly they flip the script and you start feeling responsible for their happiness, their emotion, and their well-being. We talked about this on day 1, right? You are not responsible for anyone else's emotions or feelings. We covered it again in day 2. Boundaries. You are not responsible to go and mow their yard. They are responsible for going and mowing their yard. And yet, we fall into this trap all the time because very often, you are compassionate, you're empathetic, you're trying to use the strategies you've been taught, and instead you walk right into the trap. Here's what happens. You end up backtracking on your boundary in order to avoid feeling guilty. Who's having flashbacks to yesterday, right? Drop 3 in the comments if you have fallen into this guilty trap, this where they have been able to take what you're saying, make you feel guilty, make you feel bad, and you have backtracked. And instead of, because you didn't want to risk further conflict, or because you didn't like feeling guilty and you wanted to stop that guilty feeling, right? So here's an example. You might say to them, I can't do that thing for you this time. Like, sorry, you asked me to do something and I can't do it. And they might respond with something like, wow, after everything I've done for you, well, I guess I know where I stand now. Right? Who's heard something like that? That is a guilt trip, and it is not based in truth. So the work here that we're going to get into in a minute is learning to recognize what is happening, because when you can recognize it and identify it, you can do something about it. Okay, tons of 3s. Yes, trap 4. Trap 4. Well, let me count my fingers. Trap 4 is the silent treatment cycle. Well, I guess I just won't talk to you then. So instead of addressing an issue when you bring it up, or instead of responding with dialogue and conversation and seeking to understand you, they withdraw, they ignore, they freeze you out, which also makes you feel guilty, right? How many of you, drop 4 in the comments, how many of you have dealt with this cycle? This dynamic triggers anxiety in you. It makes you feel like you're responsible to fix things in order to restore the peace, which is what they want, right? They're punishing you for your boundary and trying to put you in the position where you feel like you've done something you have to fix. Okay? This dynamic can also teach you that having needs equals punishment. Having needs is a bad thing. If you bring up your needs, I'm going to make you pay for that because that is not my responsibility. And this can happen with anything, any conversation, any boundary. Look at all the 4s. Tony says 4, but it's peaceful. Well, it might be peaceful, but it's not healthy because there's so much going on behind that. All right. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we have, just so I get them in the right order, we have defensiveness, blame shifting, the guilt hook, and the silent treatment. Drop in the comments which one happens the most in your relationship. Is there one that, most of the time in these relationships, all 4 traps show up. But if there's one that really stands out to you, let me know in the comments which one happens the most. All right, so you ready to talk about how to deal with them? This is where you're going to want to take notes. Well, and I put all 4 traps and I put all 4 strategies that I'm about to give you in the homework. So you'll have those you can print out. Wendy says the guilt trap, The silent treatment lasts longer. Silent treatment for mostly. Okay, so let's talk about the strategies. Ready? Here we go. 4 strategies to stay in control in these conversations and to hold your boundaries without escalating conflict. Okay, now keep in mind, these are strategies specifically for these high conflict relationships. Okay, they may work just fine in some of your other relationships. It's not necessarily bad to use them in your healthy relationships. But you may not have to take it to this extreme or this level in those healthier relationships. Okay. All right. Number 1, the calm statement. So here's where here's what this hinges on. This hinges on your ability to stay calm. Okay. So this is something we have to practice, and we're going to talk about this tomorrow. The focus actually of tomorrow's call is going to be about how to stay calm in conflict and in reactive situations. I think most of us are going to find that very useful. Okay, but if you can stay calm, you can say something like, I hear you. I acknowledge your point. I see what you're saying, whatever it is, but I see this differently, and we're going to have to pick this up later. Right? So it's I acknowledge you. I do not agree with you. We'll come back to it later. Okay? They're not going to like that. That's okay, right? That's a boundary. Number 2, the exit strategy. So if things escalate, you just remove yourself. If you start, I think it was Wendy said in her homework, if you start swearing at me, she's going to start saying, if you start swearing at me, the conversation's over. That's a great one. Remove yourself before you have a chance to participate in this escalation that both of you are doing, which just makes everything worse. Okay. And by the way, part of the exit strategy, especially if you are dealing with someone who's giving you the silent treatment, sometimes you exit the conversation before it even happens, right? Because sometimes you've lived with this person, you worked with them, you've been sometimes your whole life. If it's a sibling, your intuition knows, your body knows if a conversation is likely to lead straight to the silent treatment. Part of your exit strategy might be to set a boundary where you're like, history has taught me, the pattern in this relationship has taught me that this conversation has no good outcome in sight, so I'm going to choose not to have the conversation at all. That's okay. Like, you are not obligated to have any conversation with anyone at any point. You get to choose. Okay. So you can't always, with these silent treatment people, you can't always say, we're going to talk about this later when you're calm, because their escalation is not the problem, right? Their de-escalation is the problem. So that's kind of the point I'm making there. All right. Number 3, this is my favorite, the broken record. I use this one. It kind of makes me laugh now. And this is where you just choose one statement that expresses your boundary or your response, and you just repeat it over and over again. My favorite is asked and answered. So when I am getting badgered with questions, with accusations, when someone is like pushing me every which way to decide where they can best find a weak spot to get at me, I'll just say asked and answered. But why this? I use it with my kids too. But mom, like, why this? Why this? Why this? And I'll answer them once, and then after that I say asked and answered. And it helps, that response also helps keep you from over explaining, which is a huge trap we fall into. All right, number 4, the number 4 strategy that we can use to avoid these traps is the observer. So this is where they insist, you just don't get it. You're just not really listening to me. You can say something like, some kind of neutral observation. That's really interesting that you see it that way. Full stop. Okay. Or, that's a really fascinating perspective. Full stop. Don't over explain. Never over explain. Okay. Or even just, okay. See, we feel like if we say something like that, we're somehow agreeing with them, but we're not. My husband told me once that I was a horrible person and I could not possibly be a Christian because I was contemplating divorce. And I looked at him and I said, that's really fascinating that you think that. He got really mad, but actually what happened was he walked away because I didn't give him anything to argue about, right? If you say, okay, when someone says something, it does not mean that you agree with them. What it means is you're saying, I acknowledge and I respect that that's your position. But it's really hard for someone to argue when you say something like, okay, or like, that's really fascinating you think that, because you're not disagreeing, right? These guys, these people, men, women, doesn't matter. They are oftentimes baiting you over and over again until you give them something that they can latch onto and dig their teeth into and go after. And so using these responses, any of these 4 responses, it takes that ammunition away from them that we so often give them. Okay. Vicky said, okay, Joy says, my favorite is the number 3 to the X. Yep, I'm okay with thinking that. Yep. I'm okay with that being your opinion. They don't like that really, because what it means is how they interpret it as is you don't care about my opinion. Okay. Which actually is kind of true. If you are learning how to detach from other people's opinions of you, it's a beautiful thing. And you can say something like that. Vicky says, thank you for speaking to this. It's so hard for me to figure out how to set a boundary with someone who gives silent treatment. Yeah. Silent treatment is tough, right? Because it's not an argument. Well, it is an argument, but it's not a conversation argument. And there's not a lot of relationship advice out there telling you how to deal with the silent treatment. Here's what I would do. Well, I kind of alluded to this, but let me just give you a little more on the silent treatment. The silent treatment is about control, and it's about punishment. Now, you might not think that initially because it feels like, how could they be controlling me when they're not even saying anything, when they're not even doing anything, right? But the silent treatment is a withdrawal of, or a refusal to give you what you want or need, right? So they're basically saying, if you don't behave the way I want you to behave, I will withdraw my affection, my conversation, my response, my attention, all those things from you. And that is a way of attempting to control you. They're sending you a message that says your behavior is going to get you a negative result, so don't do that anymore. Right? And that's exactly what typically happens over time. We stop doing those things because we do not want the negative reaction. Joyce says, no, they don't like it. Yes, the first time you texted it, you didn't believe it. Yeah, that's awesome. I use it in reverse too, by the way. So he'll say something really mean or nasty to me, and I'll just be like, that's interesting that you think that. But I will also use it when he says something really ridiculous about himself, like when he's trying to convince me how amazing he is, or how whatever, like he's the better parent and he's this, whatever it is, doesn't matter. And he'll say something like, well, you know, I'm just this really amazing dad, and it's terrible that my kids don't get to spend more time with me. And I'll just say, well, it's interesting that you think that, or that's a really fascinating perspective. He hates that. He does not. Here's the thing, guys. These strategies are a power move. Like, if you feel powerless in your relationship, in this dynamic, whatever trap you're falling into it because you're trying to reclaim some of your power. You're trying to escape the control and the manipulation and the tactics of the other person, right? When you stop falling in the trap, which, by the way, again, if you didn't notice, all 4 of those strategies involve saying less, doing less, right? Engaging less. When you pull back and you stop, you reclaim your power. We think that reclaiming our power means fighting and winning and pushing harder than they push. And in fact, withdrawing and taking a step back and choosing how you're going to respond and responding in a very minimal way is often the biggest power move that you can make in your relationship. And when I say power move, I'm not talking about all of a sudden they go from being in control and manipulating and controlling the whole narrative to suddenly you are. I'm talking about you're reclaiming, you're taking back what's yours, the power that they've taken from you, and saying, I think I'm going to keep all my power over here. Like, I think I'm going to stop giving you this control. I'm going to stop giving you this power over me. And that is amazing. If you can learn how to do that, you can shift your whole relationship. Thanks so much for tuning in today. If this episode really hit home and you're thinking, I need more of this, I would love to invite you to reach out and ask me more about conflict and connection. It's my signature program where we take this work even deeper. We turn your breakthroughs into lasting change with tools, coaching, and support every step of the way. Send me a message on Instagram or Facebook or email me at alyssa@coachingwithalyssa.com. Check all those links in the podcast notes below. And I'd be honored to hear from you and walk with you on this journey. I'll talk to you soon. Scratch that talk to you soon part. I'll see you soon in the next episode of Equilibrium Echoes.